My parents skipped my MIT graduation to watch my younger sister sway in the background of a dance recital. They had no idea that was the exact moment I permanently severed them from my life. When my cousin's wedding forced us into the same room 6 years later, they assumed they could still pull the strings. They were about to discover exactly what happens when you try to bully a woman who now owns the strings. My name is Chloe, 33 years old, and I spent my entire life being treated like a disposable stepping stone for my sister. Before I tell you how I tore down their facade in front of the entire family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind toxic family that you are no longer under their control. The crystal chandeliers of the St. Regis Aspen Resort cast a warm glow over the marble floors of the VIP lobby. My cousin Maya was getting married, and the extended family had descended upon the mountain town for a weekend of forced smiles. I stood near the massive stone fireplace, nursing sparkling water, wearing a custom emerald gown. I arrived early to check into my room and brace myself. I had not spoken to my parents or my sister Isabella in 6 years. I knew coming here meant breaking that peace, but Maya had always been kind to me, and I refused to let my family dictate my life. I did not even have time to finish my drink before the peace shattered. The sharp clicking of designer heels echoed across the marble floor. I turned to see my mother Vivian marching directly toward me. She wore a pristine white fur coat and an expression of profound irritation. There was no hesitation in her stride, no softening of her eyes. There was no greeting, there was no hug. She stopped 2 feet away, her manicured hand immediately shooting out, palm up, as if expecting me to hand over my purse. "Hand over the key card for the presidential suite right now," she demanded. Her opening line hit the air like a whip. Isabella needs the space for her glam squad to set up, and her room is simply too cramped. A single woman like you does not need 2,000 square feet. You can take the standard room on the second floor for Isabella. Go straight down and switch the names immediately. She did not ask. She commanded. The audacity of her demand hung between us, heavy and suffocating. 6 years of silence, and her first instinct was to strip me of my comfort to accommodate my younger sister. In her mind, I was still the obedient scapegoat meant to sacrifice everything so Isabella could shine. A cold, calm energy settled over me. The old Chloe would have shrunk back, stammered an apology, and marched straight to the reception desk to downgrade her accommodations to keep the peace. But I was not that girl anymore. I stood tall, meeting her harsh glare with a steady gaze. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that echoed in the quiet lobby. The sound clearly caught her off guard. Her outstretched hand dropped slightly, a flash of confusion crossing her face. "Are you laughing at me?" Vivian snapped. "Your sister is extremely stressed about this event, and you are being selfish." I took a slow sip of my water before looking her dead in the eye. "I am laughing at the absolute delusion it takes to walk up to me after 6 years and bark orders like I am your personal assistant," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You are not getting my key card. This suite is under my name, paid for with my money, and I plan on enjoying every single square foot." Vivian gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a theatrical display of shock. "How dare you speak to me that way? We are family, and family accommodates each other. You have always been selfish, keeping everything for yourself while your sister struggles. You need to do this for her." "Selfish," I repeated, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Is this like the time you accommodated family by forcing me to empty my college savings account so Isabella could attend a 6-month interpretive dance program in Paris? A program she quit after 3 weeks because her feet hurt." I watched my mother swallow hard. I remember working 4 separate jobs at MIT. I remember serving coffee at dawn, tutoring freshmen until midnight, and cleaning the campus library just to afford my textbooks, all while you bought Isabella a brand new car as a reward for moving back home. You drained my future to fund her vacation, and now you want me to hand over my hotel room so she can have better lighting for her social media photos. That was different. My mother stammered, her flawless composure finally cracking under the weight of the truth. She needed that experience for her career. You were always smart. We knew you would figure out the money somehow. And I did figure it out, I replied smoothly. That is exactly why I can afford the presidential suite and Isabella cannot. I am not the naive college student you can bully into submission anymore. You lost the right to ask anything of me the day you skipped my thesis defense to watch her prance around in the background of a recreation center stage. My mother stared at me, her face flushed with embarrassment. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a single finger, cutting her off instantly. The keycard stays with me, I stated, my tone absolute. Tell Isabella to do her makeup in the bathroom like everyone else. I turned my back on her, walking away and leaving my mother standing speechless in the center of the hotel lobby. I barely had time to enjoy the stunned silence radiating from my mother before a new commotion erupted near the valet entrance. The revolving doors spun rapidly, spitting out a mountain of designer luggage, followed by my younger sister. Isabella swept into the lobby like she expected a red carpet to unroll beneath her feet. She wore a pristine white trench coat, oversized sunglasses, despite being indoors, and a smile that looked sharp enough to cut glass. She was talking loudly into her phone, her voice carrying over the gentle piano music playing in the background, making sure everyone in the vicinity knew she had arrived. Trailing a few steps behind her was her husband, Marcus. At 34, he was a strikingly handsome African-American man who usually carried himself with a quiet, steady confidence. Today, however, he looked completely hollowed out. Dark circles shadowed his eyes and his shoulders slumped under the weight of Isabella's garment bags and vanity cases. He looked less like a husband and more like a weary pack mule forced to endure a marathon. As a financial risk analyst, Marcus was a smart, decent guy. I always wondered how long it would take for my sister to drain the life out of him. Looking at his exhausted posture, I had my answer. Isabella finally ended her phone call with a dramatic sigh and spotted me standing near our mother. Her fake smile vanished instantly, replaced by the familiar sneer she had perfected during our teenage years. She practically strutted across the marble floor, her heels clicking in a rapid, aggressive rhythm. She ignored my mother completely and stopped right in front of me, looking me up and down with exaggerated pity. "Chloe," she drawled, drawing out my name like a mild insult. "I am shocked you actually showed up. I thought for sure you would find some excuse to hide in your little suburban apartment. And wow, look at you. You actually tried to dress up today." She reached out and pinched the fabric of my custom emerald gown, rubbing the silk between her fingers with a condescending chuckle. "Is this from a clearance rack at a department store? You know, if you were struggling that much to find something appropriate for Aspen, you could have just asked me. I have plenty of old dresses. I am planning to donate to charity. I could have spared you the embarrassment of wearing this cheap polyester rag in front of Maya's wealthy in-laws." I glanced down at my dress, then back at her face. The irony was almost physically painful. My gown was a $40,000 bespoke creation hand, stitched in Paris and fitted to my exact measurements. It cost more than her entire heavily branded outfit combined. But Isabella had always equated wealth with giant flashy logos. If a piece of clothing did not scream its price tag in neon letters, she assumed it was worthless. "That is very generous of you, Isabella," I replied, my voice smooth and unbothered. "But I prefer not to wear clothes bought on maxed-out credit cards. I hear the interest rates on your favorite store cards are absolutely brutal these days." Isabella's jaw tightened, a flash of genuine panic crossing her eyes, before she masked it with a loud, abrasive scoff. Before she could launch into another tirade, Marcus stepped up beside her. He carefully set down the mountain of luggage and offered me a small, polite nod. His eyes held a deep weariness, but his greeting was completely genuine. "It is good to see you, Chloe," Marcus said quietly. "You look very well. Thank you for coming." "It is good to see you too, Marcus," I replied, keeping my tone respectful. I meant it. Marcus was the only collateral damage in my family that I actually felt sorry for. "You look like you could use a strong drink in a quiet room." Marcus let out a dry, humorless chuckle that spoke volumes about his current reality. You have no idea, he murmured, rubbing the back of his neck. My mother, who had been simmering in her own outrage, finally found her voice. She grabbed Isabella's arm and pointed an accusing finger at me. Your sister is refusing to hand over the presidential suite, Vivian announced, her tone dripping with manufactured outrage. She is deliberately trying to sabotage your weekend. I told her you need the space for your makeup team, but she is being completely spiteful, Isabella gasped, whirling around to face me, her eyes widening in theatrical horror. Are you kidding me? She practically shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings and drawing the attention of several hotel guests checking in at the front desk. Chloe, you cannot be serious. You know how important this weekend is for my brand. I have a whole aesthetic planned for my social media followers, and I cannot film content in a tiny standard room. Give me the keycard right now. I did not move a muscle. I just watched her throw a temper tantrum in the middle of a luxury resort like a spoiled toddler denied a toy. Marcus stepped closer to his wife, placing a gentle restraining hand on her elbow. Isabella, please, he said, his voice low and pleading. Let it go. People are staring at us. We can make the standard room work. I am exhausted, and I want to put these bags down. Please lower your voice. The moment his fingers touched her arm, Isabella whipped around and slapped his hand away as if his touch burned her. She turned her fury entirely onto him, her voice rising to a vicious pitch that made the nearby concierge flinch. Do not you dare tell me to lower my voice. Marcus, she hissed, jabbing a manicured finger into his chest. If you were an actual man who could provide for his wife, I would not have to beg my selfish sister for a room. Marcus physically recoiled as if she had struck him across the face. The exhaustion in his eyes deepened into something that looked dangerously close to total defeat. He did not raise his voice or argue back. He simply uncurled his hands from her luggage cart and took a slow, deliberate step away from his wife. He looked at the floor completely drained of whatever fight he had left in him. I watched the exchange with a mixture of pity for him and absolute disgust for my sister. She was willing to humiliate her own husband in a crowded hotel lobby just to score a cheap point in an argument over a hotel room. Before I could tell Isabella exactly how pathetic she was, a booming voice echoed across the marble foyer, cutting through the tension like a blunt axe. There is my superstar. I did not need to turn around to know it was my father. Richard strode into the lobby with the exaggerated swagger of a man who desperately wanted everyone to believe he owned the building. He wore a navy blue blazer that was a little too tight across the middle and a gold watch that caught the chandelier light a little too perfectly. He walked straight past me, completely ignoring my existence, and wrapped his arms around Isabella in a tight, suffocating hug. Isabella instantly dropped her vicious scowl and melted into the embrace, playing the role of the exhausted, persecuted daughter perfectly. Daddy, she whined, pressing her face into his shoulder. Chloe is being incredibly mean to me. She will not give up the suite, and my makeup artists are going to be here in 2 hours. How am I supposed to get ready for the rehearsal dinner in a standard room? Richard pulled back and patted her cheek with a sickeningly sweet smile. Do not you worry about a thing, princess, he said loudly, making sure his voice carried to a group of our extended relatives who were gathering near the concierge desk. Aunt Martha and Uncle Ted had just arrived, and they were already looking our way, drawn by my father's booming projection. A woman of your stature deserves nothing but the best, especially today. He turned to face the growing audience of family members, pulling Isabella against his side like a trophy. Listen, everyone, Richard announced, waving his free hand to gather their attention. I wanted to wait until the rehearsal dinner to share this, but I simply cannot hold it in any longer. Let us give a massive round of applause to my incredible daughter, Isabella. She just received a verbal commitment for a $5 million venture capital investment to open her very own elite dance academy. A chorus of gasps and polite applause rippled through the lobby. Aunt Martha clasped her hands to her chest, beaming, while a few cousins murmured their congratulations. Isabella preened under the attention, pushing her oversized sunglasses up into her hair and striking a modest pose that looked entirely rehearsed. She waved her hand dismissively as if a $5 million deal was just an everyday occurrence. Oh, stop it, Dad, she demurred, soaking up the spotlight. It is just a verbal agreement right now. The official paperwork gets signed and the funds are wired first thing tomorrow morning. The investors were just completely blown away by my business plan and my vision for the academy. I took a slow, calm sip of my sparkling water. I kept my face entirely neutral, but inside I was laughing so hard I could barely breathe. A $5 million venture capital investment. A business plan that blew the investors away. I knew exactly which investment firm she had pitched her absolute garbage fire of a business plan to because that firm belonged to me. Watching her stand there bragging about money she was never going to see was the most entertaining thing I had witnessed in 6 years. Richard finally turned his attention to me. The proud, doting father expression vanished instantly, replaced by the familiar look of condescending disappointment I had endured my entire childhood. He looked me up and down, taking in my emerald gown with a scoff that suggested he thought I bought it at a thrift store. "And then there is you, Chloe," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Still working that boring desk job trying to crunch numbers for somebody else. You know, it really is a shame you did not inherit your sister's entrepreneurial spirit, or her drive. But I suppose somebody has to do the tedious paperwork in this world, while the real talent builds empires." Vivian stepped up next to him, crossing her arms over her white fur coat and nodding in agreement. "We tried to tell you, Chloe," she chimed in. "We warned you that refusing to listen to us would lead you nowhere. Now look at you, 33 years old, single, and refusing to help your highly successful sister out of pure, bitter jealousy." Richard took a step closer to me, invading my personal space in an attempt to intimidate me. It did not work. I held my ground, keeping my eyes locked on his. "I will tell you what I am going to do for you, Chloe," my father said, his tone patronizingly magnanimous. "If you march over to that reception desk right now, transfer the presidential suite into Isabella's name, and apologize for your incredibly selfish behavior, I will ask her to do you a favor. Since her new academy is going to be a massive operation, she is going to need a lot of help. If you show a little family loyalty today, maybe she will hire you. I am sure she needs a receptionist, or maybe a janitor to sweep the dance studios after hours. It would be a huge step up from whatever dead-end corporate cubicle you are currently rotting in." Isabella let out a sharp, cruel laugh, leaning her head against our father's shoulder. "Oh, Dad, I do not know if I could trust her with the floors," she sneered. "She might get jealous of the dancers and try to sabotage the recitals. But I suppose I could let her handle the trash bins. Family has to support family, right?" The sheer audacity of their performance was breathtaking. They stood there completely convinced of their own superiority, building a castle out of sand, while blindly handing me the match to burn it all down. Marcus was staring at the marble floor, looking like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. He knew something they did not know. He knew about Isabella's gambling debts and the second mortgage, but even he did not know the ultimate punchline to this spectacular joke. I lowered my glass of sparkling water. The ice clinked softly in the quiet tension of the lobby. I looked at my father, then at my mother, and finally at my grinning sister. I let a slow, sharp smile spread across my face. "A janitor." I repeated, my voice carrying clearly across the space. "That is a very generous offer, Dad. It really is." I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting them stew in their unearned confidence. I had spent my entire life biting my tongue, swallowing my anger, and shrinking myself to make them comfortable. I was done shrinking. The trap was set, and they had walked right into the center of it willingly and eagerly. All I had to do now was spring it. A passing waiter carrying a silver tray glided past us at that exact moment. I calmly reached out, placed my half-empty glass of sparkling water onto his tray, and picked up a tall crystal flute of vintage champagne. I raised the glass to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the cool liquid wash over my tongue. I was completely unbothered by the heavy silence settling over the lobby. My father stood there with his chest puffed out, expecting me to crumble into a puddle of tears or run away in shame. My mother had her arms crossed, waiting for my inevitable surrender. Isabella was practically vibrating with malicious joy, anticipating my apology. I let out a soft, amused sigh. I lowered the champagne flute and looked directly into my sister's gloating eyes. A $5 million elite dance academy, I said, rolling the words around in my mouth as if tasting something incredibly bitter. That sounds like quite the rigorous academic undertaking, Isabella. Tell me, will the curriculum cover actual classical technique, or will you just be teaching the students how to perform that same 20-minute backup routine from the third row? Isabella's smug smile faltered instantly. Her perfectly contoured face twitched as confusion briefly overrode her arrogance. What are you talking about? She snapped, her voice losing its sugary sweet edge. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. The air around us seemed to crackle with static electricity. I am talking about your grand recital 6 years ago, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the marble lobby, ensuring that Aunt Martha, Uncle Ted, and every single eavesdropping cousin heard every single syllable. You know, the one where you played a background tree waving a green ribbon for exactly 20 minutes while standing in the third row behind the actual talented dancers? My mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat as if I had physically struck her. Chloe, that is enough, she hissed, stepping forward to shield her precious golden child. You will not disrespect your sister's artistic journey in front of this family. Her artistic journey, I countered, laughing aloud. That is a very creative way to describe a hobby you both threw away my future to validate. I turned my attention back to my father, who was suddenly looking very uncomfortable in his tight navy blazer. You skipped my MIT thesis defense for that tree routine, Dad. Did you forget that part of the story when you were bragging to Aunt Martha just now? Let me refresh your memory. I turned to face the gathered relatives, making sure to make eye contact with the aunts and uncles who had just been clapping for Isabella's imaginary millions. 6 years ago, I was standing in front of a panel of the most distinguished professors in the country. I announced, my voice steady and unwavering. I was defending a master's thesis in advanced financial modeling. A degree I paid for entirely by myself because my parents drained my college fund to pay for Isabella's European dance vacation. I had begged my parents to come to Cambridge for just one afternoon to see me graduate, to see me achieve something that actually mattered. The lobby was dead silent. The piano player in the background had even stopped playing, sensing the escalating hostility. Aunt Martha looked horrified, her eyes darting between me and my parents. Uncle Ted lowered his drink, shifting his weight awkwardly. But they told me they were too busy. I continued, refusing to break eye contact with my father. They said they simply could not make the flight. I found out a week later through a social media post that they had actually flown to Los Angeles to watch Isabella wave her little green ribbon in the background of a community theater showcase. They skipped my graduation from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology for a 20-minute amateur recital. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. How dare you air family business in public like this? He bellowed, pointing a thick finger at my face. You have always been a jealous, bitter girl, holding on to ancient grudges because you cannot stand to see anyone else shine. We made a choice to support the child who actually appreciated us. You were always too independent, too cold. You did not need us there. I did not need you there. I repeated the words, tasting like ash. No, you are right, Richard. I did not need you. I survived without you. I thrived without you. But you did not stay away because I was independent. You stayed away because celebrating my success meant acknowledging that I was doing better than your golden child. It meant admitting that the daughter you treated like a burden was actually the only one in this family with any real ambition. Isabella let out a dramatic sob, covering her face with her hands and leaning heavily against my mother. Why is she doing this to me, Mom? She wailed, her voice echoing shrilly off the high ceilings. I just wanted to share my good news with the family, and she is ruining everything. She is trying to destroy my special day just like she always does. Vivian wrapped her arms tightly around Isabella, shooting me a look of pure venom. You are a monster, Chloe, she spat, her voice trembling with rage. You show up here after 6 years of silence just to tear your sister down. You are pathetic. If you think making up these dramatic stories is going to make anyone here respect you or your boring little desk job, you are completely delusional. Everyone here knows exactly who you are. I took another slow, calm sip of my champagne. The bubbles danced on my tongue, a perfect contrast to the heavy, suffocating tension radiating from my family. The surrounding relatives were whispering furiously to one another, exchanging shocked glances. The pristine, flawless image my parents had spent years carefully cultivating was beginning to crack right in front of their eyes. "I am not making up stories, Vivian," I said, lowering my glass. "And I am not here to tear Isabella down. I am just providing some necessary context for her fabulous new business venture. Because when you run around a luxury resort bragging about a $5 million investment, you really should make sure you actually secured the funding first." My father stepped in front of my mother and sister, positioning himself like a shield. His fists were clenched at his sides. "What is that supposed to mean?" he growled, his voice dropping to a threatening register. "The deal is done. The investors love her. You know absolutely nothing about the venture capital world." I smiled, feeling the absolute power of the secret I was holding. The tension in the lobby had reached a boiling point, and I was entirely in control of the heat. I looked past my father and met Marcus's exhausted gaze. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was time to push this family dynamic entirely off the cliff. The standoff in the lobby was interrupted by a polite chime from the resort's public address system, announcing that the pre-wedding dinner was beginning in the Grand Alpine Hall. The sudden sound broke the spell, holding us all in place. My father shot me one last murderous glare before placing a protective hand on Isabella's back, guiding her toward the dining hall like she was fragile cargo. Vivian trailed closely behind, casting a look of pure disgust over her shoulder at me. Marcus brought up the rear, his head bowed, the invisible weight of his marriage pressing heavily upon him. I waited until the immediate crowd dispersed before making my own way to the hall. The space was breathtaking, designed to reflect the rustic elegance of Aspen, with exposed wooden beams, crystal lighting, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-capped mountains. The room was buzzing with the lively chatter of extended family and Maya's new in-laws. I navigated through the sea of guests, exchanging brief, polite pleasantries with distant cousins, who looked at me with renewed, albeit wary interest after my lobby performance. My eyes scanned the elegant tablescapes, looking for my assigned seat. I knew Maya had arranged the seating chart weeks ago. She and I had maintained a quiet, supportive relationship over the years, communicating mostly through emails and the occasional phone call when she needed career advice. She knew exactly what my parents were like, which was why she had explicitly told me she was seating me at the VIP family table, right next to her and her new husband's immediate relatives. As I approached the prominent round table situated near the front of the room, I noticed Vivian hovering over the place settings. Her hands moved quickly, darting between the silver name card holders. She snatched a card from a prime seat between Uncle Ted and a wealthy-looking woman I recognized as the groom's mother. She then scuffled toward the very back of the hall near the swinging kitchen doors and the restrooms to a table designated for unruly toddlers and cousins twice removed who only showed up for free alcohol. I watched her slide my name card onto the table in the back, replacing it with a card bearing the name of one of Isabella's minor influencer friends who had somehow scored an invite. Vivian dusted her hands off with a satisfied smirk and turned around freezing when she saw me standing just a few feet away. "Looking for your seat, Chloe?" she asked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness as she gestured vaguely toward the back of the room. "It seems Maya put you over there with the younger cousins. I am sure you will feel much more comfortable away from all the serious business conversations at the main table. You never did quite know how to mingle with successful people." I did not break eye contact as I walked past her, my steps slow and deliberate. I moved straight to the table by the kitchen, picked up the silver holder containing my name card, and turned back toward the front of the room. I walked directly to the VIP table, located the seat Vivian had just reassigned to Isabella's friend, removed that card, and firmly placed my own name back in its original position. Vivian practically lunged forward, her voice a harsh whisper to avoid drawing attention from the groom's family seated nearby. "What do you think you are doing? You cannot just switch seats because you feel entitled to sit at the front. You are disrupting Maya's careful planning." I pulled out the heavy mahogany chair and sat down, smoothing the skirt of my emerald gown. "Actually, Vivian, I said, keeping my volume conversational, but ensuring my tone was razor sharp. Maya personally placed me in this exact seat. She sent me a picture of the seating chart yesterday, so unless the bride experienced a sudden bout of amnesia between yesterday and today, the only person disrupting her careful planning is you. My mother's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. She glanced nervously at the groom's mother, who was now watching our exchange with thinly veiled curiosity. "Chloe, please do not cause another scene," Vivian hissed, leaning down so her face was inches from mine. "Isabella's investors might be sending representatives to this dinner. She needs her friends near her for support. You are just trying to insert yourself where you do not belong." I leaned back in my chair, completely relaxed, and met her panicked gaze. If Isabella needs a cheering squad of Instagram influencers to handle a dinner conversation, perhaps she is not quite ready to run a $5 million business. And as for where I belong, I assure you Maya knows exactly who she invited to sit at her VIP table. If you want to argue about it, we can call the bride over right now and ask her to clarify her seating arrangements in front of everyone. Vivian opened her mouth, her eyes flashing with a mix of fury and fear, but a throat clearing interrupted her. Maya, looking radiant in her rehearsal dinner dress, stood just behind my mother. "Is there a problem?" Aunt Vivian Maya asked, her voice cheerful, but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "I noticed you moving name cards earlier. I hope you were not trying to relocate Chloe. I specifically wanted her sitting with my new in-laws. She has so much valuable insight into the corporate world, and I know they have been eager to speak with her." My mother stiffened, trapped by the bride's direct intervention. "Oh no, Maya dear," Vivian stammered, offering a painfully forced laugh. "Just a simple misunderstanding. I thought the catering staff had made a mistake." Maya smiled, a sharp, knowing expression that mirrored my own. "No mistake at all. Chloe is exactly where she needs to be." Maya placed a warm hand on my shoulder before gliding away to greet other guests. Vivian stood there for a long moment, completely defeated, before turning on her heel and stalking back toward Richard and Isabella. I adjusted my napkin, ready for the evening to truly begin. The dinner service commenced with a parade of waiters carrying silver trays, but the food tasted like ash under the suffocating weight of my family's collective glare. While the groom's parents engaged me in conversation about global markets, I could feel the hostile energy radiating from my parents' table across the room. The family mobbing had officially begun. Every time a distant cousin or aunt walked past my chair to reach the buffet, they dropped a passive-aggressive comment. Aunt Martha muttered something about ungrateful children ruining special occasions. A cousin intentionally bumped my chair, offering a sarcastic apology about how hard it was to see people who blend into the background. I maintained my composure, slicing my steak with precision and offering warm smiles to the groom's family. I knew exactly what my parents were doing. It was their classic psychological warfare. They wanted to isolate me to make me feel so entirely unwelcome that I would crack apologize and fall back into my designated role as the family scapegoat. They were using the extended family as their personal army of enforcers, a tactic they had perfected when I was a teenager. As the evening wore on and the wine flowed freely, the liquid courage at my parents' table reached a tipping point. The speeches concluded, music grew louder, and guests began to mingle. I excused myself to get a refill of sparkling water at the private bar near the terrace doors. I had barely taken my first sip when I found myself boxed in. Richard materialized on my left, his face flushed from several glasses of expensive scotch. Vivian flanked my right, her white fur coat draped over her arm, her eyes darting around to ensure no one of high importance was watching us. They had cornered me expertly, cutting off my only exit. "Are you enjoying yourself, Chloe?" my father asked, his voice low and laced with a menacing edge that sent a familiar chill down my spine. "Playing the big shot at the VIP table while your mother and sister sit back there dealing with the humiliation you caused." "I am having a lovely time, Richard," I replied, refusing to shrink away from his towering frame. "Maya throws a beautiful party. It is so refreshing to be around people who actually appreciate my company." Vivian scoffed, stepping closer so I could smell the sharp tang of her perfume mixed with white wine. "Cut the act, Chloe. We did not come over here to listen to your sarcastic remarks." We came to offer you a chance to redeem yourself, an opportunity to finally be a useful part of this family instead of a constant embarrassing disappointment. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely intrigued by their sheer audacity. A chance to redeem myself, how magnanimous. And what exactly does this redemption entail? Do I need to shine Isabella's shoes or perhaps pay for her next luxury vacation so she can pretend to be a cultured traveler? Richard reached inside his blazer and pulled out a thick, folded stack of legal documents. He slapped the papers down onto the polished marble surface of the bar counter right next to my water glass. The heavy thud of the paper sounded like a gavel striking a block. Isabella's venture capital deal. My father began tapping his index finger against the front page. The investors are incredibly impressed with her vision, obviously. However, because it is a substantial amount, $5 million to be exact, the firm has a standard bureaucratic requirement. They need a secondary financial guarantor on the loan. Just a small formality, really. Someone to co-sign the paperwork to satisfy the risk management department. I stared at the thick stack of papers, my mind racing, as their grand manipulation finally clicked into place. The sudden insistence on my attendance, the fake smiles before the lobby confrontation. It was never about mending fences or wanting me present for family photos. It was a calculated ambush. They needed a signature. "You want me to co-sign a $5 million business loan for Isabella?" I asked, making sure to keep my voice flat and devoid of the roaring laughter bubbling up inside my chest. "Not just co-sign," Vivian interjected quickly, leaning in close. "The investors need collateral on paper. We know you have that little suburban apartment. It is not much, but Richard spoke to a friend at the bank who said it has enough equity to serve as a baseline guarantee for the first tranche of funding. You will sign the deed over as collateral. Isabella will pay the loan back within a year when the academy takes off, and you will get your apartment back. There is zero risk." I looked from my mother's desperate, greedy eyes to my father's demanding glare. They were deadly serious. They had spent the entire evening treating me like dirt on their shoes, only to corner me at the bar and demand I risk my home for a sister who had just insulted me in the lobby. "Let me get this straight," I said, leaning against the bar counter. "You want me to risk my home, my financial stability, and my credit to guarantee a $5 million loan for a woman who has never held a job for more than 6 months? A woman who throws tantrums when she does not get the presidential suite." "You owe us," Richard snarled, abandoning all pretense of a polite request. "We fed you for 18 years. We tolerated your rebellious attitude. It is time you pay this family back for everything we sacrificed. Sign these papers, Chloe, and you will do it tonight." I picked up the stack of legal documents. It was dense, filled with standard financial jargon and binding clauses that would ruin a normal person for life if the loan defaulted. I looked up at my parents, unbothered by their desperate attempts to intimidate me. A smile touched my lips. A laugh bubbled up from the very depths of my chest. It started as a soft chuckle and quickly escalated into genuine laughter. I stood there holding a massive contract that would easily bankrupt a normal citizen and laughed right in my own parents' arrogant faces. The sound echoed over the gentle clinking of glasses, causing a few heads to turn immediately in our direction. My father's face contorted in absolute fury, while my mother glanced around nervously, terrified that the wealthy groom's family might witness this unscripted moment of defiance. I tossed the papers back onto the marble bar. The documents slid across the polished stone and bumped against Richard's glass. "You have got to be out of your minds," I said, wiping a tear of amusement from my eye. "You want me to hand over the deed to my home to secure a loan for a woman who cannot even pack her own bags without throwing a tantrum?" "This is not a joke," Chloe, Richard hissed, slamming his fist against the bar. "You owe us. We gave you life. We raised you. We provided for you. You did the bare minimum required by law to keep a child alive," I corrected him, my tone adopting a cold, razor-sharp edge. "You fed me and clothed me. Congratulations on not going to prison for child neglect. Let us do the exact math. You drained my college fund to send Isabella on a European vacation. That was $80,000 stolen from my future. You kicked me out after I graduated from MIT because I refused to take a job at your friend's accounting firm. I built everything I have from nothing. I owe you nothing. Vivian slammed her manicured hands onto the marble counter, leaning in so close I could see the angry lines around her mouth. You will sign those papers, or we will make sure you are completely cut off from this family. She threatened, her voice a venomous whisper. You will never be invited to another gathering. You will be dead to us. I am already dead to you, Vivian, I replied smoothly, picking up my water. I have been dead to you since I realized I was just an accessory in your fake perfect life. You only resurrected me today because you needed a human shield to protect your golden child from her own financial incompetence. So go ahead and cut me off. It will save me the trouble of blocking your numbers again. The crowd parted and Isabella stormed over. She had clearly been watching from across the room and realized the ambush was not going according to plan. Marcus trailed behind her, his expression tight with deep anxiety. Isabella inserted herself between our parents, glaring at the unsigned documents resting against the Scotch glass. Why hasn't she signed it yet? Isabella demanded, stamping her designer heel against the hardwood floor. Mom, you promised this would be handled before the main course. I need those documents finalized so I can celebrate my academy tonight. My investors are expecting confirmation tomorrow morning. I looked at my younger sister, taking in her pouting lips and indignant stance. She truly believed the universe existed solely to cater to her whims. Isabella, I said, capturing her undivided attention, I am not signing your loan documents. I am not putting my property up as collateral for your imaginary dance academy. I am not lifting a finger to help you secure $5 million. Isabella's jaw dropped. She looked at our parents, expecting them to fix this immediately. Dad, make her sign it, she whined, her voice rising in pitch. She is ruining everything. I need that money. My entire brand depends on this launch. I cannot make her do anything if she is going to act like a selfish brat. Richard growled, glaring at me with unfiltered hatred. She is choosing to destroy your future out of pure spite. Spite, I echoed, stepping closer to Isabella, so she had to look me in the eye. Let me make this incredibly clear for you, Isabella. I am refusing to sign this because it is a terrible business decision. You have no business plan, no revenue model, and zero experience running an enterprise of this magnitude. You want $5 million to play dress up and pretend you are a CEO for your social media followers. If any firm gives you that money, they are delusional. I am not letting you drag me down when this collapses. Isabella's face turned a vivid shade of crimson. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, registering the guests who had stopped their conversations to watch our confrontation unfold. The realization that she was not getting her way, that the money she had started bragging about was slipping through her fingers, hit her like a physical blow. The humiliation of being rejected by the sister she had mocked was too much to handle. You are just jealous, Isabella shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. You have always been jealous because I am beautiful and people actually like me. You are nothing but a bitter, lonely woman, hiding in a cheap dress, pretending you matter. You want me to fail because your own life is an absolutely pathetic joke, and you despise my happiness. Her chest heaved as she breathed heavily, her fists clenched at her sides. Marcus gently touched her shoulder, trying to guide her away from the scene she was causing, but she shoved him off with a violent jerk of her arm. She was spiraling into a total meltdown, the spoiled golden child finally hearing the word no and having absolutely no idea how to process the rejection. I did not back down. I watched her unravel, completely unbothered by her juvenile insults. Your temper tantrum is not going to change my mind, Isabella, I stated calmly. Find another victim to fund your delusions because my answer remains no. Isabella stared at me, her chest heaving as the reality of my absolute refusal finally penetrated her thick skull. She had spent her entire life getting exactly what she wanted the moment she batted her eyelashes or shed a single tear. Being denied completely and publicly simply broke her brain. I could see the malicious gears turning behind her eyes as she calculated her next move. She needed to regain the upper hand. She needed the crowd to turn against me. She needed to be the victim. Her eyes darted to the bar counter. Without a second of hesitation, her hand shot out and grabbed my father's full glass of expensive Cabernet. She spun back toward me with frightening speed. With a flick of her wrist disguised as a clumsy, frustrated gesture, She hurled the contents directly at my chest. The dark red liquid splashed across the bodice of my custom emerald silk gown. The wine soaked through the delicate fabric, instantly spreading like a massive dark bruise down the front of the $40,000 dress. The cold liquid seeped through to my skin, heavy and clinging. Drops of red wine splattered onto the polished marble floor at my feet. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. The sheer audacity of the assault left my parents momentarily paralyzed. I looked down at the ruined silk, my expression entirely flat, feeling the cold dampness against my collarbone. I did not gasp. I did not flinch. I did not give her the satisfaction of a visible reaction. But Isabella was already launching into the next phase of her performance. Before I could even raise my head to look at her, she dropped her empty wine glass onto the floor where it shattered into dozens of jagged pieces. Then she let out a piercing, hysterical sob. "Oh my God!" Isabella wailed, her hands flying to cover her face as her shoulders shook with violent manufactured tremors. "I am so sorry. I did not mean to. You just made me so upset. Why are you doing this to me, Chloe? Why are you so cruel?" She stumbled backward, leaning heavily against the bar, as if the emotional weight of my rejection had physically broken her. The fake tears flowed instantly, ruining her carefully applied mascara. She sobbed loudly, ensuring her voice carried across the sudden dead silence of the Grand Alpine Hall. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of dinner conversation had completely stopped. Every single guest, from Maya's new in-laws to our most distant cousins, turned their heads to witness the spectacle unfolding by the terrace doors. "You have always hated me," Isabella screamed through her perfectly timed tears. "You have always been so jealous of me. I just wanted to build something beautiful. I just wanted to make my dreams come true and make our family proud. But you cannot stand to see me happy. You want to ruin my life just because you are miserable and alone." My mother snapped out of her shock and immediately sprang into action. She did not look at my ruined dress. She did not offer me a napkin or an apology for her daughter's unhinged behavior. Instead, Vivian rushed to Isabella's side, wrapping her arms around the sobbing woman and glaring at me as if I was the one who had just thrown a glass of wine. "It is okay," sweetie, Vivian cooed, stroking Isabella's hair while shooting daggers at me over her shoulder. "Mommy is here. Do not listen to her. She is just a bitter, spiteful girl who wants to drag everyone down into her own misery." Richard stepped forward, his face dark with rage, positioning his large frame between me and his crying golden child. "Look what you have done," he growled, pointing a thick finger at my wine-stained chest. "You provoked her. You came here tonight specifically to cause a scene and break your sister's heart. You are an absolute disgrace to this family, Chloe." I stood my ground, ignoring the cold wine dripping from my hemline onto my designer heels. I looked past my aggressive father and the dramatic display of my mother comforting her fake crying daughter. My eyes locked onto Marcus. He was standing a few feet away, his arms hanging limply at his sides. He had seen the whole thing. He had seen the deliberate flick of the wrist. He knew exactly what his wife was doing. The look of utter disgust and bone-deep exhaustion on his face told me everything I needed to know. He was living in a nightmare, suffocating under the weight of her constant manipulation. Isabella peeked out from behind her hands, checking the room to ensure her audience was fully engaged. Seeing the horrified faces of the wedding guests, she amplified her performance. She sank lower to the floor, her cries echoing off the exposed wooden beams. "I just asked her for a little help," Isabella wailed to the room at large, playing the wounded martyr to absolute perfection. "I just wanted my sister to support my business. But she laughed at me. She called my dreams a joke. She said she wanted me to fail so I would lose everything. Why do you hate me so much, Chloe? What did I ever do to you except love you?" A low murmur of disapproval rippled through the dining hall. Aunt Martha shook her head, looking at me with profound disappointment. Several of my father's business associates whispered among themselves, casting judgmental glances at the wine-soaked woman who had apparently just crushed her younger sister's innocent dreams. The false narrative was spinning completely out of my control, exactly the way my parents had always conditioned our entire family to view us. In their twisted eyes, Isabella was the radiant, ambitious angel, and I was the cold, jealous monster trying to tear her down. The whispers from the surrounding tables escalated into a low, harsh buzzing sound that filled the massive hall. I could hear snippets of conversation floating through the heavy air. Aunt Martha leaned across her table, muttering to Uncle Ted about how I had always been a difficult child who never appreciated my parents. A cousin from my father's side shook his head, throwing me a look of pure disgust while comforting his own wife, who seemed scandalized by the entire ordeal. The groom's family, who had just minutes ago been engaging me in intelligent conversation about global markets, now stared in absolute shock at the wine dripping from my chin and soaking my custom gown. They were wealthy, refined people unaccustomed to such trashy displays of familial warfare. I stood frozen in the center of the storm, refusing to break eye contact with my mother. The cold Cabernet seeped through the silk layers, sticking uncomfortably to my skin, but I did not permit myself to shiver. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Isabella continued her Oscar-worthy performance on the floor, burying her face in her hands and letting out jagged theatrical sobs that echoed off the exposed wooden beams. Her wails were perfectly calculated to extract maximum sympathy from the crowd. She peeked through her fingers, just long enough to ensure the audience was still captivated, before launching into another round of dramatic weeping. Vivian fed on the energy of the room. The murmurs of support for Isabella and the collective disapproval directed at me acted like gasoline on the fire of my mother's rage. She straightened up, leaving Isabella huddled on the marble floor, and took 2 aggressive steps toward me. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The meticulously crafted facade of the elegant, wealthy matriarch melted away completely, leaving behind the bitter, controlling woman I had spent my entire childhood trying to escape. "Look around you, Chloe!" My mother spat, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Look at what you have done to this family. We welcomed you back. We gave you a chance to sit at the main table to be part of this celebration, and this is how you repay us. You humiliate your sister in front of all these important people. You reject our generous offer to let you help her business. You are a vile, ungrateful wretch, and you always have been." I tilted my head slightly, letting a single drop of wine fall from my jawline onto the floor. "I did not humiliate her, Vivian," I replied, my voice lethal and quiet. "She humiliated herself the moment she threw a temper tantrum over a hotel room, and she cemented it the moment she threw a glass of wine like a petulant toddler. You are just upset because for the first time in her life, someone told your golden child no, and you have absolutely no idea how to handle it." That was the breaking point. The undeniable truth of my words shattered the last remaining fragment of my mother's self-control. Vivian let out a guttural sound of rage. She raised her right hand high into the air, her diamond rings catching the light of the crystal chandeliers overhead. She aimed directly for my face, putting her entire body weight behind the motion, fully intending to slap me across the cheek in front of 200 wedding guests. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. I saw the blow coming, but I made a conscious choice right then and there. I was not going to cower. I was not going to raise my hands to protect myself. I was not going to flinch. I locked my eyes onto hers, standing perfectly still, projecting an aura of absolute invincibility. If she wanted to assault me in front of Aspen's elite and her entire extended family, I would let her do it. It would only prove my point and expedite her ultimate destruction. The entire dining hall gasped in collective horror, watching a mother prepare to strike her daughter. But the blow never landed. A large, strong hand shot out from the periphery of my vision, moving with startling speed and precision. A set of long fingers wrapped like a steel vise around Vivian's wrist, freezing her hand in midair just inches from my face. The collective gasp from the room caught in everyone's throats. I shifted my gaze slightly and found Marcus standing right beside me. His chest was heaving under his tailored suit jacket, and his jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle jumped in his cheek. He had moved so quietly and swiftly that neither my mother nor my father had seen him coming. He held Vivian's wrist with an iron grip, refusing to let her move another millimeter toward me. Vivian's eyes widened in profound shock. She stared at the hand holding her wrist, then looked up at her son-in-law, her mouth falling open in disbelief. "Marcus, what do you think you are doing?" she shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical frequency. "Let go of me right now. This arrogant brat needs to be taught a lesson about respect. Let me teach her a lesson." Marcus did not let go. Instead, his grip tightened visibly until Vivian winced in discomfort. He stood incredibly tall, using his physical presence to shield me from any further attack. The exhaustion that had weighed down his features in the lobby was entirely gone, replaced by a fierce, burning resolve. He looked down at my mother with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. The years of biting his tongue, the years of enduring the toxic dynamics of the family, the years of watching Isabella destroy everything around her, had finally culminated in this single defining moment. He did not yell. He did not scream. The quietness of his voice made his words echo like thunder in the stunned silence of the room. "You will not touch her," Marcus said, his tone dropping to a dangerous, gravelly warning that commanded absolute obedience. "You will never lay a hand on her." With a slow, deliberate motion that radiated unquestionable authority, Marcus pushed Vivian's arm down and away from me. He released her wrist with a sharp flick, as if her skin burned him, or as if he had just touched something foul. Vivian stumbled back a step, clutching her wrist to her chest, completely bewildered by the sudden rebellion of the man she had always treated as a compliant background character. Richard stepped forward, raising his hands to intervene, but Marcus simply held up a single palm, stopping my father dead in his tracks. The power dynamic in the room had shifted violently and permanently. Marcus turned his back on my parents and faced the stunned room. Isabella remained crumpled on the polished marble floor. Her sobbing hitched as she realized the dynamic had completely fractured. She peered through her manicured fingers, expecting to see her husband rushing to her side to offer apologies and comfort. She extended one trembling hand toward him, her lower lip quivering in a flawless display of victimhood. "Marcus, please," she whimpered, her voice dripping with manufactured fragility. "Tell them to stop being so mean to me. Make Chloe leave. She is ruining our special night." Marcus did not kneel to comfort her. He did not offer his hand to help her stand. He looked down at the woman he had married with an expression so devoid of affection, it made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. The exhaustion that had plagued his features all evening was entirely eclipsed by a burning, righteous anger. He had played the supportive background character for years, swallowing his pride to maintain the peace in a family that viewed him as nothing more than a convenient accessory for their golden child. That era ended tonight. "Drop the act!" Isabella Marcus commanded, his voice cracking like a whip across the silent dining hall. "It is over! Every single bit of it is over!" Isabella froze. The theatrical tears stopped instantly. She dropped her hands from her face, revealing dry eyes and a look of genuine panic. She scrambled to her feet, her designer heels slipping slightly on the wine-splattered floor. "Marcus, what are you saying?" She stammered, her voice losing its breathy vulnerability and turning sharp. "You are supposed to be on my side. You are my husband." "Not anymore," Marcus replied, his tone absolute and unwavering. He reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored jacket. The room watched in collective anticipation as he withdrew a thick, worn manila envelope. It looked heavy, bulging with papers that had clearly been reviewed and handled multiple times. Marcus gripped the envelope tightly, his knuckles turning a shade lighter. He took 2 long strides toward the VIP table, where the unsigned guarantor contract still rested next to my water glass. With a violent downward motion, he slammed the thick envelope onto the heavy wooden table. The sharp crack echoed through the cavernous hall, making Aunt Martha jump in her seat. "You want to know why the investment fund is demanding a guarantor for your precious $5 million loan?" Marcus yelled, turning back to face his wife. "You want to stand in front of this entire room and pretend it is just a standard bureaucratic formality. You want to play the innocent victim while your parents try to bully your sister into risking her own home. Let us tell them the real reason, Isabella. Let us tell everyone exactly why no legitimate financial institution on this planet will hand you a single dime without someone else putting their neck on the chopping block. Vivian stepped forward, her face pale with dread. Marcus, stop this right now, she hissed, glancing frantically at the groom's wealthy relatives, who were watching the scene with unblinking fascination. You are embarrassing the family. We can discuss whatever marital issues you have in private. This is not the time or the place. Oh, this is exactly the time and the place, Marcus shot back, refusing to be silenced by my mother's desperate attempts at damage control. You cornered Chloe in public. You tried to publicly shame her into signing away her financial security to protect your perfect image of your perfect daughter. If you want to handle things in front of an audience, Vivian, then we are going to give the audience the entire truth. He gestured aggressively toward the manila envelope resting on the table. That is not a business plan in there. That is a comprehensive record of complete and utter financial devastation. Isabella has been parading around, talking about a dance academy while bleeding us dry. The investors did not ask for a guarantor because it is standard policy. They demanded a guarantor because Isabella is a walking financial liability who cannot even secure a basic credit card without getting rejected. Richard puffed out his chest, trying to regain his alpha male status. Now listen here, Marcus, he growled, taking a menacing step toward his son-in-law. I will not stand by while you slander my daughter. She is a brilliant entrepreneur. The investors love her vision. They do not care about her vision. Richard Marcus interrupted, slicing through my father's bluster with cold, hard facts. They care about her credit score, and her credit score is currently sitting in the absolute gutter. She is a liability. For the past 2 years, Isabella has not been building a business. She has been funding a lifestyle she cannot afford to impress people on social media who do not care about her. Isabella let out a high-pitched shriek, lunging forward to grab the envelope from the table. Shut up, she screamed, her face contorted with panic. Do not listen to him. He is lying. He is just trying to humiliate me because I am more successful than he will ever be. Marcus easily blocked her path, stepping between her and the table. I am not lying, Isabella, and you know it, he said, his voice projecting clearly so that every guest in the back rows could hear him. I found the hidden statements 3 weeks ago. I know about the secret credit cards. I know about the designer bags bought on installment plans. And most importantly, I know about the money you have been wiring to offshore betting accounts. A collective gasp ripped through the dining hall. The word betting hung in the air like a physical entity. My mother swayed on her feet, grabbing the edge of the bar counter to steady herself. My father stared at Marcus, his jaw slack, his mind struggling to process the information. That is right, Marcus continued, turning to address my parents directly. Your perfect golden child has a massive gambling addiction. While you were bragging to your country club friends about her entrepreneurial spirit, she was spending her afternoons losing hundreds of thousands of dollars on online casinos and sports betting. She blew through our joint savings account 6 months ago. When that ran dry, she started opening credit lines in my name without my permission. She has systematically destroyed our financial future to feed her addiction and maintain her fake, flawless image online. I stood perfectly still, watching the implosion. The wine on my dress was forgotten. The hostility of the room had vanished, replaced entirely by morbid, rapt attention. Marcus was dismantling the golden child myth piece by piece, stripping away the glittering facade to reveal the rotting foundation beneath. And when the debt collectors started calling Marcus, pressed on, his voice ringing with undeniable authority, she panicked. She concocted this dance academy scheme not to build a business, but to secure a massive lump sum of cash to pay off her gambling debts before I found out. That is what the $5 million is really for. It is a bailout. But the venture capitalists ran a background check. They saw the catastrophic credit history. They saw the mountain of hidden debt. They laughed her out of the room until she promised she could get her wealthy family to guarantee the loan. She used you, Richard, to set a trap for Chloe tonight. Marcus did not wait for my father to formulate a response. He reached for the heavy manila envelope resting on the mahogany table and ripped the metal clasp open. With a swift, aggressive motion, he pulled out a thick stack of bank statements, credit card bills, and legal notices. He threw them across the table. The papers slid over the polished wood, scattering like dead leaves. Some fluttered to the floor, landing right next to Isabella's designer heels. "Take a look," Richard Marcus demanded, his voice booming through the silent hall. "Go ahead and read them. Read the detailed account of your brilliant entrepreneur daughter destroying our lives." My father hesitated, his eyes darting between the scattered papers and Isabella, who was now shaking her head frantically. "Do not look at them, Dad," she pleaded, her voice cracking with genuine terror. "He fabricated all of that. He printed those out to frame me because he is jealous of my success." Marcus let out a dark, bitter laugh. "Fabricated? You think I spent my weekends forging bank logos and notarized foreclosure warnings just to ruin this lovely dinner?" He stepped closer to the table, pointing at a specific document bearing a prominent bank logo. "Read the second page, Richard. Read the part where she forged my signature to take out a second mortgage on our house." A collective gasp rippled through the wedding guests. My mother grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "A second mortgage," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Isabella, what is he talking about?" Isabella backed away from the table, crossing her arms defensively. "I was investing, Mom," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape route. "You have to spend money to make money. It was seed capital for the academy. I was just leveraging our assets to build my brand. You and Dad always taught me to think big." Marcus slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. "Seed capital. You call wiring $2 million to high-limit tables at the Bellagio seed capital." He turned to face the crowd, making sure every single relative heard the truth. $2 million gone in less than 8 months. She was not taking business meetings in Vegas. She was sitting in VIP suites, blowing our entire life savings on baccarat and roulette, while posting highly edited photos to her Instagram, claiming she was scouting real estate for dance studios. The murmurs in the room quickly escalated into loud, shocked whispers. Aunt Martha leaned so far forward, she nearly knocked over her water glass. The groom's family looked utterly appalled, whispering to each other behind their hands. The flawless, influential image Isabella had spent years curating on social media was disintegrating right in front of her. "You are lying," Isabella shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at him. "You are just a bitter, broke man who cannot handle a powerful woman. I have partnerships. I have brand deals. I have 2 million followers who look up to me." "You have 2 million bots you bought with a maxed-out credit card," Marcus corrected her, his tone dropping to a lethal calm. "You do not have partnerships, Isabella. You have debt collectors calling my office threatening to garnish my wages. You have a credit score that just dipped below 400. You spent $80,000 on designer clothes and luxury vacations just in the last quarter solely to stage photo shoots so you could pretend you were living the dream. And when the walls started closing in, when the bank sent the final notice of default, you panicked." My father finally picked up one of the bank statements. His hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. He adjusted his glasses, staring at the highlighted figures Marcus had provided. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. He flipped to the next page, and then the next, his eyes scanning the endless lists of casino withdrawals, wire transfers, and declined transactions. "Isabella," he murmured, his voice cracking. "What is this? Over $400,000 in cash advances in 1 month. I had a system," Isabella cried out, stepping toward him and grabbing his arm. "Dad, you have to understand. I just hit a bad streak. I was going to win it all back. I had a connection who gave me insider tips. If Marcus had not frozen the accounts, I would have doubled our money by now. You know how smart I am. You know I always win." "You never win," Marcus shouted, shutting down her delusion instantly. "You have never won a single thing in your life that was not handed to you on a silver platter by your parents. And the moment you actually had to face the real world, you gambled away our home to maintain your pathetic illusion of superiority." Vivian rushed forward, snatching the papers from Richard's hands. Her eyes scanned the numbers, her face contorting with panic. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. This cannot be right. There must be a mistake. Isabella is a smart girl. She was pre-med. She knows how to manage finances. She dropped out of pre-med after 2 semesters because she refused to wake up for morning labs. I chimed in, breaking my silence. I stepped forward, making sure my voice carried the same cold authority as Marcus. You simply paid off the university administrators to keep her enrolled as a liberal arts major so you could save face at your country club. She has honestly never known how to manage anything except your guilt, Vivian. My mother whipped her head toward me, her eyes flashing with renewed hatred. Shut your mouth, Chloe, she hissed. This is none of your business at all. You are just enjoying this because you are a completely heartless and cruel person. I did not even blink at my mother's venomous insult. The dead silence that followed her outburst was so profound that I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vents high above us. The entire hall was holding its collective breath. Everyone was waiting to see if the wealthy, proud parents would finally hold their golden child accountable for destroying her marriage and gambling away millions of dollars. Instead, I watched in absolute awe as Richard and Vivian did exactly what they had done for the past 29 years. They immediately pivoted to making excuses for her. Richard straightened his jacket, clearing his throat as he deliberately stepped over the scattered bank statements on the floor. He refused to look at the numbers. Listen, Marcus, my father said, adopting his deep, persuasive boardroom voice. We are all adults here. We all know that the financial world can be incredibly predatory. Young entrepreneurs face an immense amount of pressure to secure capital, and sometimes they make risky investments. The casinos market themselves as networking hubs. She was probably just trying to rub elbows with the right wealthy investors and got a little carried away. It is a temporary setback. We can hire a financial advisor to restructure this debt. It is not the end of the world. Vivian nodded eagerly, her hands fluttering as she smoothed Isabella's hair. Exactly, Richard, she chimed in, her voice dripping with desperate rationalization. Isabella has been under so much stress lately. Building a brand from scratch takes an enormous toll. You should have been more supportive, Marcus, instead of freezing her accounts and snooping through her private documents. She is a visionary, and visionaries sometimes struggle with the mundane details of accounting. If you had just given her the space to execute her strategy, she would have doubled that money. You pressured her into this panic. I stared at them, my mind struggling to process the depth of their delusion. They were staring at documented proof of a $2 million gambling addiction and a forged mortgage, yet they were blaming the husband who had just lost his home. They were wrapping their arms around a con artist and calling her a visionary. It was a masterclass in psychological denial. Isabella, realizing that her parents were still firmly in her corner, suddenly found a renewed burst of vicious energy. The panic that had gripped her moments ago melted away, replaced by a toxic, aggressive arrogance. She stepped out from behind our mother, her chest puffed out, and pointed a manicured finger directly at Marcus. You hear that she screamed, her voice shrill and grating. My parents understand business. They understand what it takes to be successful. You are nothing but a broke loser, Marcus. You have always been a broke loser, dragging me down with your small-minded corporate mentality. You never believed in my academy. You never supported my dreams. I had to take out that second mortgage because you were too cheap and cowardly to invest in your own wife. She took a step closer to him, her face twisting into an ugly sneer. You think showing these papers makes you a hero. You think embarrassing me in front of my family makes you look strong. You are pathetic. You are just a mediocre analyst who will spend the rest of his life sitting in a cubicle making pennies while I am meant for greatness. I deserve a man who can actually provide for me, not a weak, sniveling accountant who cries over credit card bills. I am leaving you, Marcus. I am taking the rest of whatever we have, and I am leaving you in the dust. The sheer cruelty of her words hung heavily in the room. Guests exchanged horrified glances, completely disgusted by her lack of remorse. She had destroyed his financial life, and now she was trying to strip away his dignity. But Marcus did not react the way she wanted. He did not yell back. He did not defend his career or his masculinity. He did not cry. He just stood there looking at the woman he had loved and married. A profound, heavy exhaustion seemed to settle into his bones, causing his shoulders to drop. But the dark shadows under his eyes were suddenly offset by something else entirely. Relief. Absolute relief. The crushing weight of her secrets, the constant anxiety of hiding her debts, the daily torment of walking on eggshells around her explosive temper had all evaporated. He was finally free. The worst had happened and he had survived it. Marcus let out a slow, deep breath. He reached up and loosened his tie, unbuttoning his collar, as if he could suddenly breathe again for the first time in years. "You can leave me, Isabella," he said, his voice quiet and calm. "But you are not taking anything because there is absolutely nothing left to take. The bank is foreclosing on the house next week. My lawyer has already drafted the divorce papers. You are on your own." He turned away from her, completely indifferent to the sharp gasp she let out. He did not look at Richard staring at him in shock, or at Vivian clutching her pearls. Instead, Marcus turned his gaze directly to me. We locked eyes across the space dividing the tables. There was a silent understanding between us, a mutual recognition of the toxicity we had both endured at the hands of this family. He had played his part perfectly, setting the stage and tearing down the first layer of their elaborate facade. Now the spotlight was quietly shifting. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, his expression resolute and calm. "It is your turn, Chloe," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent dining hall. I smiled, feeling the cool, damp fabric of my ruined silk dress against my skin. The warm-up act was officially over. It was finally time for the main event. Richard watched Marcus walk toward the exit, his heavy footsteps echoing against the hardwood floor. The moment the oak doors swung shut, my father snapped back into his role as the untouchable patriarch. Adjusting his silk tie, he puffed out his chest and turned to face the murmuring crowd. Richard cleared his throat loudly, commanding the room's attention with the practiced ease of a man who spent his life bullying boardrooms into submission. "Listen to me, everyone," he boomed, spreading his arms wide. "I apologize for that inappropriate outburst. You know how breakups can be. Marcus is suffering from a severe mental breakdown. It is a tragedy, really. He is simply lashing out because he knows Isabella has outgrown him." Vivian caught on to the lifeline Richard threw her. She straightened her posture, smoothing her white fur coat, and nodded emphatically at the surrounding tables. "Exactly," she chimed in, her voice artificially bright and devoid of her earlier panic. "Marcus is just a bitter, jealous man, trying to extort a settlement before the divorce. He fabricated those documents to force a payout. We will handle this quietly with our legal team." Isabella, sensing her parents spinning the narrative back in her favor, wiped her dry eyes and lifted her chin. Her arrogance returned in full force. "He could not handle being married to a successful woman," she sniffed, playing the tragic, misunderstood boss babe to perfection. "He wanted to keep me trapped in a boring suburban life. But I am destined for so much more. This is just a minor bump in the road." The sheer delusion was staggering. They stood in a puddle of spilled wine and shattered glass, surrounded by bank statements detailing millions in gambling debts. Yet they honestly believed they could talk their way out of reality. I watched my father pace in front of the VIP table, flushed with adrenaline, as he desperately salvaged his pride in front of the groom's wealthy family. "The truth is," Richard continued, his voice rising to an arrogant crescendo, "none of Marcus's petty lies matter. Because Isabella's venture is entirely legitimate and backed by the most prestigious investors in the country." He pointed a triumphant finger toward the ceiling, like citing a divine truth. "We do not need Marcus, and we certainly do not need Chloe's cheap suburban apartment for collateral." The guarantor's signature was just a test of family loyalty that Chloe failed. But it is entirely irrelevant now. Richard paused, letting the silence build to deliver his knockout punch with maximum dramatic effect. He puffed out his chest, looking directly at me with a smug, victorious sneer. "Because I just got off the phone with the lead investors this afternoon," he lied flawlessly. "Apex Capital is wiring the full $5 million early tomorrow morning. The massive deal is finalized. The funds are guaranteed. By this time tomorrow, Isabella will be the CEO of a multi-million-dollar empire, and Marcus will be nothing but a sad memory. A collective murmur of awe rippled through the older relatives. The name Apex Capital carried massive weight in the financial world, known for its ruthless efficiency and stellar portfolio. Mentioning that specific firm was the ultimate status symbol, a golden ticket that immediately validated Isabella's reckless ambitions to my gullible extended family. Vivian beamed, patting Isabella's arm in triumph. They really thought they had won. They thought they successfully buried the truth under a mountain of corporate name-dropping. I stood there looking down at the dark red wine stain blooming across my custom emerald silk gown. The cold liquid was sticky and uncomfortable, but I did not let it bother me. Instead, I calmly reached for a crisp white linen napkin resting on the edge of the mahogany table. With slow, deliberate movements, I dabbed at the spilled Cabernet on my collarbone, wiping the excess moisture away without breaking eye contact with my father. Apex Capital. The universe had a truly wicked sense of humor. I had spent 6 years building that firm from the ground up, turning it into a venture capital powerhouse managing billions in assets. I knew every single deal crossing our desks. I knew exactly whose business plans were approved, and I certainly knew whose absolute garbage fire applications were flagged for review. Hearing my father use my own company's name to shield his fraudulent gambling-addicted golden child was the most delicious irony I had ever experienced. Apex Capital. I repeated, my voice soft, but carrying a sharp, dangerous edge that made Richard's smug smile falter slightly. That is an incredibly prestigious firm, Dad. They have a reputation for conducting the most ruthless, uncompromising due diligence in the entire industry. Are you absolutely certain they are wiring $5 million to a woman who just had her house foreclosed on? I am absolutely positive, Richard barked, puffing his chest out even further to mask his sudden flash of panic. The managing partners love Isabella. They believe in her brand. You are just trying to poke holes in her success because you are a bitter, jealous failure who will never achieve anything close to this level of wealth. I did not argue. I did not yell. I simply let the damp linen napkin fall onto the table next to my water glass. I turned my head slightly toward the back of the dining hall, where a young waiter in a crisp black vest and white shirt had been hovering quietly near the kitchen doors all evening. He was casually holding a polished silver serving tray, blending perfectly into the busy background of the lavish event. Nobody else in the entire room had paid any attention to him, but he was not an actual employee of the Aspen Resort. His real name was David, and he was my highly trusted executive assistant. I slowly caught David's watchful eye across the incredibly crowded room and finally gave him a single sharp, decisive nod to begin the end. David did not hesitate. The deferential waiter persona vanished entirely, replaced by the razor-sharp efficiency of a top-tier corporate operative. He smoothly placed his silver serving tray onto the nearest empty table, ignoring the startled gasp of an elderly aunt who had been reaching for an appetizer. Reaching beneath the draped tablecloth of the catering station, David retrieved a sleek black leather briefcase he had stashed there hours prior. He strode across the dining hall with absolute purpose, his steps eating up the distance between the kitchen doors and the VIP table. The guests watched him in bewildered silence, their heads turning as this supposed resort employee confidently bypassed the furious patriarch and the sobbing golden child. Richard puffed out his chest, stepping forward to intercept David, assuming this was just a confused staff member interrupting his grand moment of triumph. "Excuse me," Richard barked, raising a hand to block David's path. "We are having a private family discussion here. Go fetch the manager immediately." David did not even break his stride. He smoothly sidestepped my father with fluid grace, treating Richard like an inconvenient piece of furniture. David stopped right beside me and snapped the briefcase open on the mahogany table, pushing aside Isabella's untouched plate of prime rib. He pulled out a slim matte silver laptop and a tangled mess of presentation cables. Maya had spared no expense for her wedding reception, which included a state-of-the-art audiovisual system designed to project a romantic slideshow of the bride and groom during dinner. A massive high-definition projector screen was currently rolled up discreetly against the vaulted ceiling, right behind where my parents were standing. "What do you think you are doing?" Vivian shrieked, finally snapping out of her confused stupor. "Security! Someone call security right now! This waiter is completely out of control." I held up my hand, a silent command that instantly halted the two resort security guards who had started jogging toward our table from the lobby doors. "Leave him be," I called out, my voice projecting with effortless authority. "He works for me." Vivian's jaw dropped. "Works for you?" she sputtered, looking from me to David and back again. "You are a low-level data cruncher. You cannot afford a personal assistant." I ignored her completely, keeping my eyes locked on the digital dance David was performing with the cables. Within seconds, he had hot-wired his laptop directly into the resort's main AV network. The lights in the Grand Alpine Hall automatically dimmed, plunging the room into a dramatic twilight. A loud mechanical whirring sound echoed overhead as the massive white projector screen slowly descended from the vaulted ceiling, dropping down right behind my parents like a modern guillotine. The bright blue glow of the projector flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across Richard's increasingly panicked face. The wedding guests shifted in their seats, leaning forward in rapt attention. The tension was so thick it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Richard lunged toward the table, his heavy hands slamming down on the mahogany surface as he tried to grab the laptop away from David. "Shut this off," he roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "I will not have my daughter's celebration ruined by some jealous, unhinged prank." David simply shifted his weight, using his shoulder to expertly block Richard's aggressive grab, protecting the keyboard while typing in a complex alphanumeric password with his free hand. The screen illuminated the entire front half of the room, currently displaying a blank desktop background. I stepped around the table, placing myself directly between my furious father and my assistant. The wine soaking the front of my dress clung to my skin, cold and sticky, but I wore the stain like war paint. I had spent 29 years being told to sit down, be quiet, and make myself small so Isabella could take up all the air in the room. I was never going back in that box. I looked at the three of them, my father breathing heavily, my mother clutching her pearls in terror, and my sister staring at the giant blank screen with wide, frightened eyes. "You wanted to talk about business, Richard," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "You wanted to stand in front of this entire room and brag about Isabella's incredible entrepreneurial skills. You wanted to use the name Apex Capital to legitimize her absolute financial train wreck of a life. So let us talk about Apex Capital." My father tried to maintain his bluff, but the sweat beading on his forehead betrayed his mounting panic. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You know nothing about that firm," he sneered, his voice cracking slightly. "You are just trying to embarrass us because you are petty and alone. The managing partners are brilliant, ruthless men who recognized Isabella's genius. They are wiring that money tomorrow morning, and there is nothing your pathetic little slideshow can do to stop it." I took one final step forward, closing the distance until I was standing mere inches from him. I never raised my voice. I did not need to. The silence in the room was absolute, ensuring that every single word I spoke landed with devastating precision. I looked my father dead in the eye, watching the false confidence completely drain from his features as reality finally began to shatter his delusion. "Apex Capital never funds fraudsters, Dad." The words hung in the crisp aspen air, sharp and heavy as a blade. Isabella let out a choked gasp, stumbling backward until she hit the edge of the nearest table. Vivian covered her mouth, her eyes darting frantically between me and the glowing projector screen. Richard's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The unbreakable patriarch was suddenly speechless. David tapped the enter key, and the screen behind my parents instantly flashed to life, illuminating the dark room with the undeniable catastrophic truth. The massive screen behind my father glowed with a stark white background. Centered perfectly on the display was the sleek logo of Apex Capital. A collective murmur rolled through the guests as they recognized the emblem. Richard turned his head, looking up at the projection. He looked back at me, his mouth working soundlessly, trying to comprehend this impossible sight. I reached into the hidden pocket of my evening gown and pulled out a thick matte black business card. It featured gold-embossed lettering that caught the light of the chandeliers. I held it up between my index and middle fingers, making sure my father could see it clearly before I dropped it directly onto the mahogany table. It landed right on top of Isabella's unsigned guarantor contract. "Take a good look, Dad," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority. "Read the name. Read the title." Richard stared at the small piece of cardstock as if it were a live grenade. His hands trembled as he picked it up. He squinted, reading the gold lettering aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "Chloe Preston, founder and chief executive officer, Apex Capital." Vivian snatched the card from his hand, her eyes scanning the text frantically. "This is a joke," she shrieked, looking around the room for validation. "This is a sick, twisted prank. You went to a print shop and made fake business cards to humiliate your sister. You do not own a venture capital firm. You are just a bitter desk clerk." I did not blink at her desperate denial. "Allow me to reintroduce myself to the family. I am Chloe Preston. I am the sole founder and CEO of Apex Capital. The men my father just mentioned managing billions in assets do not exist. There is only me. I built this empire from the ground up on my own while you all pretended I was invisible." The silence that followed was absolute. Aunt Martha dropped her fork entirely, the silver clattering loudly against her china plate. The groom's wealthy parents were nodding slowly, suddenly looking at me with immense professional respect. The realization hit my family like a physical blow. The prestigious, untouchable firm they had been using to validate Isabella's delusions of grandeur was completely entirely mine. Isabella let out a high-pitched gasp, clutching her chest as she stumbled backward. "No," she whimpered, shaking her head violently. "No, that is impossible. My broker set up the pitch. He said the board loved my vision. He said the funding was practically guaranteed." I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Your broker is an idiot, Isabella," I stated plainly. "But more importantly, your business plan was an absolute garbage fire. David, bring it up." My assistant tapped his keyboard and the giant screen shifted. Suddenly, Isabella's highly confidential loan application was displayed for the entire room to see. The title read, "The Isabella Experience, a Premier Dance Academy." The guests leaned forward, squinting at the financial projections displayed on the slide. "Let us talk about this brilliant vision," I continued. "You asked for $5 million. You allocated $2 million for a launch party, $1 million for your salary, and $500,000 for decorating. You allocated $0 for actual dance instructors or a lease. You submitted a $5 million request to fund a vanity project." Richard's face drained of color. He looked up at the screen, reading the absurd financial breakdowns that his golden child had submitted to my firm. The realization that Isabella had no business plan, that she was just trying to secure a massive cash grab, was finally piercing through his decades of willful blindness. "But the investors," my father stammered, his voice weak. "You said they were wiring the money tomorrow." I looked at him with profound pity. "I never said that, Dad. You said that. You lied to this entire room to protect your ego because you could not stand the thought of Marcus exposing your perfect daughter as a fraud. You wanted to believe she was a genius so badly that you ignored every single red flag." Isabella was hyperventilating now, leaning heavily against a chair. She looked like a trapped animal, her eyes darting frantically for an escape. "You cannot do this," she cried, her voice cracking with panic. "You cannot show my private business documents to everyone. It is illegal. I will sue you." "You submitted these documents to my firm for review, Isabella," I replied smoothly. "As the CEO, I am simply providing transparent feedback to the applicant. And since you decided to make this a public family discussion, I am delivering your final decision in person." I stepped back to the table and looked at David, giving him a single decisive nod. David pulled up the final page of the application on the massive screen. It showed the total requested funding amount of $5 million next to a digital pending status. "You spent my entire life taking everything from me, Isabella," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. "You took my college fund, and tonight you thought you could take my home to cover your gambling debts. but the bank is closed. I reached over David's shoulder and placed my finger on the laptop's trackpad. I moved the cursor across the screen, hovering directly over the digital decision matrix. The entire room watched the giant projection, holding their breath. I looked my sister dead in the eyes, watching her entire fake world crumble into absolute dust. "Your application is denied," I whispered softly. I slowly pressed the trackpad down. A loud electronic chime echoed through the dining hall's sound system. On the massive screen behind my parents, a giant bold red stamp slammed down diagonally across Isabella's business plan. It read, "Declined," in massive capital letters. The absolute silence in the room was completely deafening, but my real work here today was far from finished. Isabella stared at the red letters on the screen, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. The reality of losing her $5 million lifeline finally crushed the last remaining fragments of her arrogant facade. She let out a pathetic whimper and sank to the polished marble floor, the heavy silk of her designer dress pooling around her like a deflated parachute. Vivian immediately dropped to her knees beside her golden child, stroking Isabella's hair and casting terrified, frantic glances up at the glowing projector screen. My father remained standing. His heavy chest heaved with every ragged breath. He looked like a cornered animal frantically searching the room for any possible escape route from this public execution. When he found none, his survival instinct kicked in, triggering the only defense mechanism he knew. He tried to bully his way out of the truth. "You cannot do this, Chloe." Richard bellowed, his voice raw and shaking. "You are violating corporate confidentiality. I will have my lawyers sue you and your firm into the ground for public defamation. You cannot just project private business documents at a family event. You are completely out of your mind." I casually rested my hands on the mahogany table, leaning forward slightly to meet his aggressive posture. "Sue me for what, Dad?" I asked, my voice ringing with crystal-clear authority. "For doing exactly what any responsible financial institution does. When your precious daughter submitted her application to Apex Capital, she listed you as a primary financial reference. She claimed that your highly successful construction firm would provide a secondary safety net for her massive loan. Did you really think my underwriting team would just take her word for it, without looking under the hood of your own enterprise?" Richard swallowed hard. A thick bead of sweat rolled down his temple. The bluster began to drain from his face, replaced by a creeping, suffocating dread. In the venture capital world, I continued pacing slowly behind the table. We conduct a rigorous process called due diligence. We deploy teams of forensic accountants to tear apart every single financial statement, tax return, and corporate filing associated with the applicant. We look for hidden liabilities. We look for unmitigated risks. We look for lies. And let me tell you, Richard, my analysts found an absolute treasure trove of lies hiding behind your polished country club exterior. The wedding guests leaned in closer, captivated by the absolute destruction of the untouchable patriarch. My Aunt Martha covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with shock. Maya, the bride, stood near the edge of the dance floor, watching the man who had always belittled her own parents finally face his reckoning. "Do you remember what you told me the night you kicked me out of the house?" I asked, letting the memory fuel the cold precision of my words. "You stood in the hallway and laughed at my business plan. You told me that I lacked the killer instinct to survive in the real world. You said that your construction company was a monument to your genius, a titanium fortress of wealth that I would never be allowed to inherit because I was a worthless failure. You bragged about building an empire while I was packing my bags in tears." I stopped pacing and locked my gaze onto his terrified eyes. "Well, Dad, your titanium fortress is nothing but a cheap house of cards. David, next slide, please." My assistant tapped the keyboard. The giant screen instantly switched from Isabella's rejected loan application to a stark official legal document. The bold black header across the top of the page was impossible to misinterpret. It was a federal court filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Richard's construction company went completely bankrupt 30 days ago. I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the dining hall. You have not been running an empire, you have been running a sinking ship. Your corporate accounts are entirely empty. Your equipment has been repossessed. You owe millions to suppliers, contractors, and the federal government. You are not a wealthy business mogul anymore, Dad. You are completely broke. Vivian snapped her head up from the floor, abandoning Isabella for a moment. She stared at the giant projection, her perfectly applied makeup streaked with tears. Richard, she gasped, her voice trembling with genuine horror. What is she talking about? You told me the company was just restructuring. You told me the cash flow issue was a temporary bank error. You said we were fine. He lied to you, Vivian, I stated flatly, not allowing my father a single second to formulate another excuse. He has been lying to you for months. He took out predatory loans to cover the payroll, and when those ran dry, he started liquidating his own retirement accounts just to keep up appearances. He let you buy designer coats and book luxury vacations while knowing the company was bleeding out. He put his enormous, fragile ego entirely above your actual survival. Richard staggered backward, grabbing a dining chair to keep himself upright. His chest heaved as he stared at the undeniable proof of his failure projected 20 feet high for his entire extended family to witness. The wealthy groom's parents, the people my father had spent the entire evening trying to impress, were now looking at him with absolute disgust. He was a fraud, and the whole world finally knew it. You spent my entire life making me feel small, so you could feel big, I said, walking around the table until I stood in front of him. You paraded Isabella around as the ultimate success story because she was just as fake as your balance sheets. You thought you could come here tonight, insult my clothes, mock my career, and force me to risk my own home to save your own drowning family. But you made one fatal miscalculation, Dad. You assumed you were the smartest person in the room. But a sinking ship cannot be saved when the captain has already sold the lifeboats. I turned slightly to my right, keeping my peripheral vision locked on my father. David, next slide, please. The keyboard clicked. The massive screen behind my parents flickered for a fraction of a second before displaying a new document. This one was not a corporate bankruptcy filing. It was something far more personal and devastating. It was a high-definition scan of a residential property deed alongside a series of escalating bank notices. Displayed in the center of the screen was a photograph of the sprawling Beacon Hill mansion where I grew up. Across the beautiful image of the perfectly manicured lawn and the grand double doors sat a glaring red banner that read, Notice of Default. A sharp collective intake of breath sucked the remaining air out of the dining hall. Vivian let out a sound that was half gasp and half shriek. Her hands flew to her face, her diamond rings digging into her cheeks as she stared at the projection of her pristine social fortress publicly marked for destruction. Richard stumbled, grasping the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles turned completely white. His jaw worked furiously, but his vocal cords refused to produce a single sound. When the construction company started bleeding cash, you did not downsize, I said, my voice projecting with relentless clarity. You did not sell the sports cars. You did not cancel the winter trips to St. Bart's or the summer rentals in the Hamptons. You certainly did not stop paying your exorbitant country club membership fees because heaven forbid the other executives suspect you were struggling. Instead, you doubled down on the delusion. You took out a second mortgage on the family estate. And when that money vanished into the black hole of your operating expenses, you took out a third. Vivian whipped her head around to stare at her husband. Her eyes were wide-wild and filled with an absolute primal terror. Richard, tell me she is lying. Vivian begged, her voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch. Tell me you did not leverage our home. Tell me you did not gamble away the roof over our heads to pay for your failed company. He could not look at her. Richard, the untouchable patriarch, stared firmly at the floor, unable to meet the eyes of the woman he had dragged into financial ruin. His silence was the loudest confession anyone in the room had ever heard. Isabella, who had been quietly weeping on the floor, suddenly scrambled to her knees. Her tear-streaked face twisted into a mask of pure panic. The house, she cried out, her voice shrill and grating. What do you mean the house is in default? That house is my inheritance. That is my safety net. I looked down at my sister, feeling a profound sense of disgust. Your safety net is gone, Isabella, I stated coldly. Your father borrowed against every single brick, every marble countertop, and every blade of grass until there was absolutely nothing left but toxic debt. He squeezed that property dry to maintain a facade of generational wealth that stopped existing months ago. I began to pace slowly in front of the projection, letting the stark financial figures displayed on the screen burn themselves into my parents' memories. The banks are not stupid, Richard. I continued, my gaze fixed on my father. They noticed when you missed the first mortgage payment. They started sending warnings when you missed the second. By the time you missed the fourth payment, they realized your construction company was completely insolvent. They knew you were never going to pay them back. Your debt became a toxic asset on their balance sheets. Richard finally raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot, his face a portrait of utter defeat. The bank said they were restructuring the loan. He mumbled, his voice completely devoid of its usual booming authority. They said they were selling the debt portfolio to a private equity firm. They promised me I would have time to renegotiate the terms with the new owners. I stopped pacing and stood perfectly still. A cold, triumphant smile touched the corners of my mouth. They did sell your debt portfolio, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent hall. Banks do not like holding on to dead weight. When a client proves to be a massive financial liability, they package that toxic debt and they sell it off for pennies on the dollar to venture capital and hedge funds who have the resources to liquidate the assets. My mother began to shake violently. Her white fur coat slipped from her shoulders, pooling on the floor next to Isabella's ruined designer dress. Who? Vivian stammered, her voice barely recognizable. Who bought the debt? I did not look at her. I kept my eyes locked on my father, watching the exact second the realization hit him. I watched the final piece of his massive ego shatter into a million jagged pieces. I told you I run a highly successful venture capital firm, I said, delivering the final crushing blow with absolute surgical precision. Apex Capital specializes in acquiring distressed assets. When your bank put your deeply defaulted mortgages up for sale, my acquisitions team flagged the address. I reviewed the portfolio myself, and I approved the purchase immediately. Richard staggered backward, as if I had driven a physical blade directly into his chest. He collapsed into a dining chair, his heavy frame sagging completely. You do not own that big house anymore, Dad, I stated, my voice ringing with finality. You do not have an empire. You do not have a company. You do not have a home. Apex Capital bought your debt. I own the house. Isabella let out a raw, guttural scream that tore through the stunned silence of the dining hall. The theatrical, delicate sobs she had perfected earlier vanished completely. In their place was a genuine, full-blown panic attack. She collapsed onto the marble floor, her legs giving out beneath her, as the absolute reality of her situation hit her with the force of a freight train. The $5 million investment was gone. Her marriage was over. Her social media empire was exposed as a fraudulent house of cards. And now the sprawling Beacon Hill mansion she had arrogantly assumed would be her ultimate safety net belonged entirely to the sister she had spent her entire life tormenting. Isabella curled into a fetal position on the floor, her hands tearing at her perfectly styled hair. She gasped for air, her chest heaving violently, but she could not seem to catch her breath. The realization that she was completely and utterly broke, with no husband to bail her out and no parents to fund her delusions, was suffocating her. Vivian dropped to her knees beside Isabella, but for the first time in 29 years, she did not immediately try to comfort her golden child. Instead, my mother looked up at me, her eyes wide and bloodshot, her meticulously maintained facade of wealthy superiority completely shattered. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, the expensive fabric of her designer gown dragging through the spilled wine and broken glass. Chloe. Vivian gasped, her voice trembling so violently it cracked. Chloe, please, you cannot do this. You cannot take our home. She reached out with both hands and grabbed my forearm. Her grip was desperate, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. I did not flinch, and I did not pull away immediately. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the woman who had spent my entire childhood making me feel small, invisible, and worthless. You have to listen to me, Vivian pleaded, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. We are family. We share the same blood. You cannot just throw your own parents out onto the street. We raised you. We gave you a beautiful life. You cannot abandon us when we need you the most. I looked from my mother's desperate, tear-stained face to my father, who was still slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the massive projector screen displaying the notice of default. He looked broken, a hollow shell of the domineering patriarch he had been just 20 minutes ago. You raised me, I repeated, my voice dropping to a calm, icy whisper. You raised me to be a background character in Isabella's life. You raised me to believe that my accomplishments meant nothing, that my dreams were inconvenient, and that my only purpose was to serve as a stepping stone for your golden child. Vivian tightened her grip on my arm, shaking her head frantically. No, Chloe, that is not true. We were just trying to push you. We knew you were strong. We knew you could handle it. Isabella was always so fragile, so sensitive. She needed more guidance. We always loved you just as much. The lie was so transparent, so pathetically desperate that it almost made me laugh. I finally pulled my arm away from her grasp, stepping back so she could not reach me again. You did not push me to be strong, Vivian, I stated flatly. You pushed me away because I refused to be a prop in your fake perfect country club life. And as for Isabella being fragile, I glanced down at my sister, who was still hyperventilating on the floor. She is not fragile. She is a manipulative, gambling-addicted narcissist who has systematically destroyed everything she has ever touched. And you enabled her every single step of the way. My mother let out a choked sob, pressing her hands against her face. Please, Chloe, I am begging you. Do not take the house. It is all we have left. We will do anything. We will apologize. We will make it up to you. Just give us time. Let us stay. I looked at the wealthy wedding guests who were watching this humiliating display of familial desperation with rapt, horrified attention. Aunt Martha had her hand over her mouth, tears shining in her eyes. The groom's parents looked sickened by the profound toxicity that had just been exposed. Give you time, I echoed, turning my attention back to Vivian. Did you give me time when you drained my college savings account? Did you give me time when you kicked me out of the house after I graduated, telling me I had 1 week to pack my bags because you needed my room to store Isabella's overflow wardrobe? You did not care if I ended up homeless. You did not care if I starved. Vivian reached out again, her hand trembling in the air. That was a mistake. I see that now. We were wrong. Please, Chloe, show some mercy. We are your family. You keep using that word, I said, my voice hardening. Family. As if sharing a bloodline gives you a free pass to treat someone like garbage for 3 decades and then demand a multi-million-dollar bailout the second your own reckless decisions catch up with you. I looked at my father, who finally lifted his head to meet my gaze. His eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a profound, crushing defeat. You built this house of cards, Richard the First said, addressing him directly. You mortgaged your future, your home, and your dignity just to maintain a lie. You chose your ego over your own survival. My father swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Chloe? He croaked, his voice barely a whisper. Please. It was the first time I had ever heard my father beg. The sound of it was jarring, completely at odds with the booming, arrogant voice that had dominated my childhood. But it did not move me. It did not erase the years of neglect, the constant belittling, or the absolute betrayal of skipping my graduation. The bank gave you notice, Dad, I said, my tone final and absolute. The foreclosure process is already underway. Apex Capital owns the debt, and we do not offer extensions to clients who have proven themselves to be massive financial liabilities. Vivian let out a heartbroken wail, collapsing forward until her forehead rested against the cold marble floor. She sobbed uncontrollably, the sound echoing through the massive hall, a pathetic symphony of grief and ruined entitlement. I turned away from my parents and looked at Marcus, who was still standing nearby, watching the destruction of the family that had treated him with such disdain. He gave me a small, solemn nod, acknowledging the brutal justice of the moment. Vivian was not ready to surrender to the reality of her consequences. She lunged forward again, her tear-stained face looking up at me as she clamped her hands around my forearm. Her fingernails dug into my skin, a desperate clawing grip, like a drowning woman trying to pull her rescuer under the water with her. "Chloe, please," she sobbed, her voice deteriorating into a hoarse, ragged screech. "You cannot walk away from your blood. We are your family. We are all you have in this world." I looked down at her hands gripping my arm. I did not feel pity. I did not feel sadness. I felt absolutely nothing for this woman. With a slow, deliberate motion, I reached over and peeled her fingers off my skin one by one. I coldly detached her arm from my grip, letting her hands fall back to her sides like dead weights. I took a step back, ensuring a physical boundary matched the emotional wall I had built years ago. "You are wrong, Vivian," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality in the silent room. "You are not all I have. You are just the people who happen to share my DNA. Family are the people who show up. Family are the people who celebrate your victories, who hold you up when you are failing, and who love you without attaching a financial condition to their affection. My family consists of the friends who let me sleep on their couches when you kicked me out. My family is the team at my company who worked late nights alongside me to build an empire. Blood is just biology." I continued, my gaze sweeping over my mother and father. "It is a genetic coincidence. It does not earn you a lifetime pass for emotional abuse, and it certainly does not entitle you to my hard-earned wealth. You made your choice. You chose Isabella 6 years ago. You chose her when you skipped my graduation to watch her dance. You chose her when you kicked me out of my childhood home. You chose her every single time you needed someone to make you feel superior. Well, you have her now. Let the golden child save you now." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. I had severed the invisible chains they had used to bind me for over 3 decades. Suddenly, the sharp sound of footsteps broke the quiet. Marcus stepped forward, leaving the periphery where he had been watching the fallout. He did not look at Isabella. He did not spare a single glance for Richard or Vivian. He walked directly toward me, his posture straight, the heavy burden of his toxic marriage visibly lifted from his broad, tired shoulders. He stopped right beside me and turned to face the entire dining hall, ensuring every guest, including Maya's new in-laws, was paying close attention. "As I mentioned earlier, my lawyer has already drafted the papers," Marcus announced, his voice steady and resolute. "But I want to make it officially clear in front of all these witnesses. I am filing for divorce from Isabella first thing tomorrow morning. She has destroyed my credit, lied to my face, and attempted to ruin my life to fund her gambling addictions. I am done being a pawn in this completely insane family dynamic." Isabella let out a fresh wail of despair, dragging herself across the marble floor toward him. "Marcus, no," she whimpered, reaching out to grab his polished dress shoes. "Please do not leave me. I can fix this. I can change. I promise I will go to rehab. We can start over." Marcus stepped back, pulling his shoes out of her reach with a look of pure disgust. "You do not want to change, Isabella," he said coldly. "You just want a new credit card to max out. We are finished. Do not ever contact me again." He turned to me and extended his right hand. I took it, shaking his hand with mutual respect. "Chloe, I want to publicly thank you, Marcus," said his voice ringing with genuine gratitude. "When I found those hidden bank statements 3 weeks ago, I was completely lost. I did not know how to untangle the massive web of financial fraud Isabella had woven. I did not know how I was going to prove to a judge that she forged my signature on that second mortgage. Thank you for answering my call." The crowd gasped again. Richard and Vivian looked at Marcus in absolute horror, realizing that I had not just exposed them. I had actively armed their son-in-law with the ammunition needed to destroy Isabella's last chance at a bailout. "Thank you for having your forensic accounting team at Apex Capital compile the exact evidence I needed," Marcus continued. "Because of your due diligence report, my legal team now has an airtight case. Your analysts traced every offshore wire transfer, every hidden Vegas hotel receipt, and every forged signature. She will not get a single dime from me in the divorce, and she will be facing severe legal consequences for mortgage fraud." The perfect family image was completely annihilated. My parents were paralyzed, realizing their daughter was likely going to prison. The extended relatives began turning their backs literally. Aunt Martha picked up her purse and walked away from the VIP table, shaking her head in disgust. Uncle Ted followed her without a word. Maya, the bride, gave me a supportive, knowing nod from across the room. I smiled at Marcus, giving his hand a firm, reassuring squeeze. "You deserve your freedom, Marcus," I told him so the whole room could hear. "You deserve a life without these parasites dragging you down. We both do." I turned my gaze back to my mother, still trembling on the cold marble floor. The brutal realization of her absolute defeat hung heavily in the air, permanently sealing the fate of the family that threw me away. I turned my back on the wreckage. My posture was perfectly straight, my shoulders relaxed, and the heavy burden of childhood trauma completely lifted from my spine. I took my first step toward the grand double doors of the Alpine Hall. The sharp click of my designer heels against the polished hardwood floor echoed with absolute finality. I did not look down at the wine staining my custom silk gown. It no longer felt like a mark of humiliation. It felt like a badge of honor, a battle scar from a war I had just decisively won. As I walked, the sea of wedding guests parted for me. It was not the parting of people making way for a pariah. It was a parting born of profound respect and genuine awe. Aunt Martha lowered her gaze, staring intently at her plate, drowning in her own decades of complicity. The wealthy relatives of the groom simply nodded in silent approval of the surgical precision with which I had defended myself. They recognized power, and they knew they had just witnessed a masterclass in corporate and personal execution. I saw Maya standing near the edge of the dance floor. She held her crystal champagne glass up in a silent toast, her eyes shining with fierce pride and unadulterated joy. I offered her a warm, genuine smile in return. She knew exactly what it took to cut the rot out of a family tree. I pushed through the heavy oak doors, leaving the stifling atmosphere of the dining hall behind me forever. I did not look back. Not once. The temptation to glance over my shoulder and relish their misery was entirely gone. They were no longer my problem. They were simply strangers drowning in a mess of their own, making a mess they had spent 30 years meticulously building. I walked across the vast marble foyer, where this entire confrontation had begun just a few hours earlier. The piano player had resumed a soft, melancholy tune, trying to return some semblance of normalcy to the luxury resort. The contrast between my arrival and my departure was staggering. I had walked into this hotel prepared for a defensive battle, wearing invisible armor against the people who were supposed to love me. I was leaving completely disarmed, weightless, and untouchable. I pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The sudden chill of the aspen night hit my skin, a stark, brilliant contrast to the heated, toxic tension I had just escaped. The cold felt incredibly purifying. It rushed into my lungs clean and sharp, washing away the lingering stench of my mother's heavy perfume and my father's expensive scotch. I stood under the grand stone portico, taking a deep breath of pine-scented air, not out of discomfort, but to truly anchor myself in the reality of my absolute freedom. The valet booth was empty, but David was already waiting for me at the bottom of the curved, heated driveway. He had slipped out shortly after packing up his laptop, ensuring my exit strategy would be completely flawless. A sleek, midnight black Maybach glided smoothly out of the shadows and came to a gentle stop right in front of me. David stepped out of the passenger side, his demeanor entirely professional, having completely shed his undercover catering disguise. He opened the heavy, armored rear door of the luxury sedan and offered me a small, deeply respectful smile. "Everything is officially filed with the legal team, Chloe," he said quietly, ensuring no passing guests could overhear. "The foreclosure proceedings on the Beacon Hill property will continue as scheduled tomorrow morning, and Marcus has already received the encrypted evidence files for his divorce attorney. His case is absolutely airtight." I nodded, stepping into the warm, beautifully illuminated interior of the Maybach. "Thank you, David," I replied, my voice steady and filled with profound gratitude. "Take the rest of the week off. You have more than earned it." The heavy car door clicked shut instantly, sealing me inside a quiet sanctuary of plush cream leather and soft ambient lighting. I leaned back into the heated massage seat, letting my muscles completely relax for the very first time all day. I turned my head to look out the heavily tinted window. The glass offered me a perfect, unobscured view into the brightly lit resort lobby, while keeping me completely hidden from the outside world. Through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched the pathetic final act of the tragedy unfold. Richard, Vivian, and Isabella had spilled out of the dining hall and into the main lobby. Without me there to serve as their common enemy, the fragile, toxic alliance they had maintained for decades instantly shattered. I watched them turn on each other like starved, desperate wolves. I could not hear their voices through the thick, soundproof glass, but their violent, aggressive pantomime told the entire story. Richard was waving his arms frantically, his face purple with rage, clearly blaming Vivian for raising such an incompetent, greedy, gambling-addicted daughter. Vivian was screaming right back at him, striking his chest with her clenched fists, demanding to know how he could secretly gamble away their entire mansion without telling her. Isabella was standing right between them, stomping her feet and yanking at her carefully styled hair, completely ignored by the parents who had just realized she was the heavy anchor dragging them straight to the bottom of the ocean. The golden child was finally experiencing exactly what it felt like to be treated as a useless burden. They would spend the rest of their lives trapped in that miserable, toxic cycle. They would blame each other, lie to each other, and desperately claw for a social status they could no longer afford. They were permanently locked in a prison of their own design, and I had just thrown away the only key. A soft vibration pulled my attention away from the pathetic display. I looked down at my phone resting in my lap. The screen illuminated with a flurry of incoming text messages. It was our private group chat, appropriately named The Real Board of Directors. It consisted of my closest friends from MIT, my lead analysts at Apex Capital, and the few trusted mentors who had actually guided me through my darkest days of poverty and depression. "Hey boss, heard the data drop went flawlessly. Drinks are on us when you get back to the city." That text was from my chief operating officer. "So incredibly proud of you, Chloe. You survived their abuse, and you conquered the world. See you at Sunday brunch." That message was from Sarah, the friend who had let me sleep on her tiny apartment sofa when my parents threw me out onto the street 6 years ago. I read the messages feeling a profound, radiant warmth bloom in the very center of my chest. This was my family. These were the people who showed up when I had absolutely nothing to offer them but my raw ambition and my friendship. They did not care about my bank account or my social status. They cared about me as a human being. I locked my phone screen and placed it gently beside me on the premium leather seat. I looked out the tinted window one last time. The chaotic, screaming, flailing figures of my biological family slowly faded into the distance as the Maybach smoothly pulled away from the resort entrance. The powerful car merged onto the dark, winding mountain road, heading swiftly toward the private airfield where my jet was waiting. I rested my head against the cool glass and smiled. A genuine, unrestrained smile that reached my eyes and filled my soul with absolute peace. The darkness of the crisp aspen night swallowed the car whole, leaving the broken wreckage of my past far behind me. Fade to black. The most profound lesson from Chloe's journey is that biological ties do not obligate you to endure abuse. True family is not defined by shared DNA, but by the people who consistently show up for you during your darkest moments. Her relatives demanded loyalty, while offering only cruelty, using her to shield their own insecurities and financial failures. By walking away from their manipulation, she discovered her true worth and built an empire. She teaches us that leaving a toxic environment is an act of radical self-respect. Surround yourself with people who value your authentic self and share your own experiences with chosen families in the comments below.